Welcome into episode number 17 of the SEC Football Hour here on Southeastern 16. I'm Chase Robinson. That is Chris Lee. As we're going to talk all things SEC football, we'll get to our fantasy. We're going to give a grade for all 16 SEC teams on the show today as well. But we like to start with what we learned coming off of another weekend of SEC football. What was an interesting, fun weekend. Some really good games, an upset. I mean, there's a lot we could gather from this past Saturday, but I'll start with you, Chris. What is something you took away from Saturday after watching SEC football?
Well, we had some big takeaways, but I think Alabama's offense kind of stole the show, and it was a hard. It was a Saturday with some competition, but just
Yeah.
seeing that offense running at its best, they averaged 8.5 yards a play against Georgia. I mean, are you kidding me? Ryan Williams had 2 catches that we'll be talking about for a long time. I think, to me, in a day where a few teams grabbed headlines, that was first and foremost because that's the game we've been circling for a long, long time, Chase.
It is. Yeah, I would completely agree with you. Questions going into the season about Alabama under Kalen DeBoer, what it would look like. I mean, to me, Alabama football has not tailed off any coming into this year. And so, yeah, that was definitely fun to watch. To tell you something I learned, Chris, is that Kentucky has a legit defense that's going to disrupt some teams this year. We saw what they did to Ole Miss. They got the win in Oxford, but we've talked about it. This defense is for real.
It really is. I mean, that's not a big surprise, but even a great defense can have a bad game against an Ole Miss or a Georgia. No, they played maybe even better against those teams, and I think we need to see the offense catch up with them a little bit, and we're seeing little signs of that. But Kentucky's defense so far has been everything we thought and more, and Ole Miss found that out the hard way.
Yeah, they really did. What's something else you learned, Chris?
Oh, I think maybe that the Hugh Freeze thing at Auburn just continues to get a little bit more tenuous. I mean, Auburn just about had that game won in the final 5 minutes and then gave it away with the big pick six, and Michael Hawkins made a couple of plays. I feel like Auburn is a topic of conversation here every week, one way or another, and certainly the way that game went down did not take the Tigers off anybody's radar.
Yeah, you're right. And that was if you're Hugh Freeze in Auburn, that is the last way you would have wanted that game to end.
Yeah.
After the performance that they had put on, they put a stop to Oklahoma, and then a pick six completely changed the narrative. And here you are back down that road again, talking about turnovers when you had a turnover-free game, and yet here you are making the biggest turnover of the game, and it was a pick six, and Oklahoma ended up winning. And I think something else to take away from that game is just the fact that Auburn, you felt the kind of the air leave the room when that happened. They couldn't bounce back from it. They couldn't go back out there and do anything offensively when they had moved the ball so well prior to that pick six. And so I feel like that turnover just took the air out of the sails.
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, if you took that game and reordered some of the events, okay, let's say that Peyton Thorne throws a pick six the first play of the game, but then you come back and, like, he's hitting a wide open Keandre Lambert-Smith, Cam Coleman, Simmons. Those, like, at times their passing game looked really, really good. And, like, if you could just switch the order and say, well, they lost and he came back and threw the ball really well, then maybe you feel a little better. You still don't feel good, but it feels a little differently come out of the game. No, instead, that was the pick was at the end, and the drive where they had to try to win it, he just looked awful. And I think that's one reason to me it's really concerning. It just felt like all confidence went out the window the minute that happened.
Yeah, and that's it. That's what it appeared to do. And look, teams are going to catch on to that, and the fact that they turn the ball over, it seems like they're done. And so you get some of these teams who are good at forcing turnovers, that could be a big problem. Something else I learned, I'll tell you in just a second. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends at Bet Online. They're the world's most trusted betting platform and your source for everything football. They've got every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. If you think you know your stuff, get in on a $200,000 mega contest to pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. The game's over. You go to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker or one of the over 150 slots games. And for every SEC team, you could check out the spreads there as well. BetOnline is betonline.ag is their website. BetOnline, the game starts here. Here's what I learned, Chris, after this week, especially after the Alabama-Georgia game, after the Kentucky-Ole Miss game, that every team in the SEC, and I don't think in years past we would have said this with confidence, but I feel like every SEC team is beatable this year. And I say that because everybody thought, well, Georgia's the standard of football. They go down. Well, Ole Miss is, man, they're so good offensively. They're so good defensively. I don't know who's going to stop them. They have a pretty, mild schedule, and Kentucky beat them. So I feel like we're in a year, and of course, in years past, anything can happen. But I feel like we're in a year where I think I can confidently say every SEC team is beatable.
Well, Georgia certainly looked very beatable the first 20 minutes of the Alabama game. Didn't know what I was watching there for a bit. Alabama looked beatable against South Florida. Maybe that's just a bad matchup, but we've seen bits and pieces of that. I think you could go on for Tennessee might be the one team that has not looked beatable so far, although I think some of that's got to do with the schedule. But Ole Miss, we thought Ole Miss was in that top group of teams. Right now, we have some questions about that. Missouri's looked beatable at times. Vanderbilt almost took them down in double overtime. Yeah, I mean, Texas might be the exception too. Texas hadn't looked very beatable so far, although it did have a weak first half against Mississippi State. Now, I would hit the flip side of that coin. I think that you've got at least 15 of the 16 SEC teams that can beat somebody good.
Yep.
Mississippi State might be the exception, but State played Texas tough for a half. But, I mean, Vanderbilt's almost knocked off Missouri. It did knock off Virginia Tech. You've got Auburn has hung tight with a number of teams and just, folded in. Even Florida, I think, with that offense can put a scare into some people. So I think that's the other part of it is that you got a lot of teams. This league goes really deep with good teams. I mean, like in the past, it seemed like you usually would have a couple of really awful teams in the SEC, usually Vanderbilt, maybe Kentucky or South Carolina or Mississippi State. Now it feels like everybody, and even State has had some moments, can compete with just about anybody else, at least for 2 or 3 quarters. And that's not something we've had usually.
That's very true. And that's good to flip that over and look at that because I completely agree with you there. Anything else, Chris, you learned over the weekend?
No, I think that's most of it. Although I think, the question I think we have is how many of these teams can make the playoff. And Ole Miss certainly did itself no favors with that loss to Kentucky.
Yep, you're right. And so that will be interesting to see how they bounce back. So that's some of the things we learned in another weekend of SEC football in the books. Well, something else that's in the books is another week of our SEC fantasy football. And again, my team's been struggling. So we'll take a look. Chris, I usually go first when we get to see how bad I did. I want to start with you this week. Let's look at Chris's team first today.
Well, Chase drops a bomb on himself just to begin this. But, yeah, I mean, the Ole Miss combo was a place I've leaned a lot this year. And Jackson Dart was just okay compared to what he's been. Henry Parrish, just okay compared to what he's been. Now, Tre Harris, my goodness, Tre Harris just lights anybody and everybody on fire every week. So Tre Harris was kind of my salvation this week. I picked up Isaiah Bond. He's had a nice game. I picked up Mason Taylor 2 weeks ago. He was just okay. And then scroll down on my defense. Just Ole Miss across the board for me. The Rebels were okay against Kentucky. Not great, but it was just kind of an okay week. And I've gotten just accustomed to Jackson Dart giving me 40 points every week. And that didn't happen. But thank God for Tre Harris once again.
I think that's the best pickup you could have made. And I know Jackson Dart again gets you big points, but I feel like Tre Harris will be consistent even if Jackson Dart doesn't have great numbers. He's going to target Harris, and so he's going to have big numbers. That was a great pickup for you. Here is my week that was my man Jalen Milroe. He comes through for me. I'm glad I got him because when you see other folks down the road with a goose
Oh,
egg out there, Jalen Milroe helped me get to that 88 points that's there.
Chase, the receiving room has just been the bane of your team's
It
existence all
has.
year. You've taken zeros there. You took them again from Perks and Watkins. That might be something you need to address.
I think it will. I will definitely be addressing that this week because we can't have zeros in the columns there, and again, Jarquez Hunter. I will say this every week. He has got to touch the football more.
Yes, we say it
And
every week.
I mean, he's got to, not only for my fantasy team, but I feel like for the success of the Auburn Tigers, he has got to touch the football more. And every week when I look at this, it reminds me when I look at how few points he gets that this is one of the top backs in the SEC, Chris. He's got to run the
Yeah.
football more.
Well, if we're striking a bargain with the football gods, I would like to request that Jalen Milroe touches the ball a little less because he single-handedly keeps you in these things most weeks.
And Milroe is just incredible.
Yeah.
I am very glad that I picked him to be on my fantasy team for sure. So that is a look, Chris winning once again, and I will be making some adjustments in the old wide receiver room this week on my fantasy team. So hopefully it will look a little different next week. All right, so let's roll into look. I thought it'd be cool at this point. We've seen all the teams. We've seen SEC games now, so I thought let's grade all 16 SEC teams. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order here. So when I mention the teams, it is not, it's alphabetical order. And you'll notice this when I go through. So just keep that in mind as I name these teams off. But we'll give a grade for each of these teams as we record this here on the second day of October. All right, Chris, I'm going to give Alabama an A. Just from what I've seen so far from Alabama, they get an A. What would you grade the Crimson Tide?
I would also grade Alabama an A. You could go A plus, given that Alabama is number one in the AP poll. But I like to hold those out to make differences between teams. Yep. And I would like to see a little bit better defensive effort than the one that blew a 28-point lead last week.
Right.
Although defense also helped it get there with 3 picks. And I would also like to see a little like the South Florida game. That one still the first three and a half quarters of that one sticks in my head a little bit is part of what they are. But I mean, we're getting really nitpicky with Alabama, but that's what happens when you're elite. We start looking in the corners where nobody else is looking.
Right. And that's exactly those reasons you just mentioned is not why there's a plus next to the A when it comes to me as well. So, both of us giving the Crimson Tide an A. All right, Chris, what would you grade the Arkansas Razorbacks?
I'm going to go B minus, and it could be a B, but I just feel like this is the team that really needed to answer the bell at the end of that Oklahoma State game and finish it. Like if they do that, and they don't come out and just wet the bed for 3/4 of the game against UAB, I'm giving them an A, but that's part of what you are. I'm encouraged. I'm also a little discouraged. Taylor Green seems to be going a little bit backwards, and maybe that's who he's facing. But I feel like there's potential for more. I feel like they've had a nice year. They're fun to watch, but I'm wanting a little bit more from the Razorbacks.
Yeah, so Chris goes B minus. We've done too much together, Chris. I also went B minus for Arkansas. We think along the same lines here when it comes to the Razorbacks. Yeah, they just that UAB game was part of it. And then Green turned the ball over too much against Auburn. I feel like kind of uncharacteristic for him. So yeah, I'm going B minus for Arkansas. All right, the Auburn Tigers. I'm going to grade Auburn at a D. Just uninspired football. They can't bounce back from mistakes. There's issues there that need to be corrected. So I'm going to grade Auburn at a D right now.
Yeah, I'm going to give them a D minus, and a D is defensible. I think that you've seen some good things out of the defense.
Yeah.
The offense, when it's not turning the ball over, has been good, but that's a big part of it. It's like, it feels like sometimes Auburn, like you're feeling it one of those, test that you did in high school or college where you're filling in the bubbles, and it just feels like sometimes they got the right answer, but instead of filling in the whole circle, they just put a check next to it and it doesn't count or something.
Yeah.
It feels like they got some of the answers, but they're not finishing the test in the right way.
Yeah, and there's still a lot to learn about Auburn because you brought it up, Chris. I mean, numbers look good. They looked good offensively against Oklahoma until the very end. Like the potential's there for this to be a totally different season for Auburn, but they're just not making good decisions, and
Yeah.
they're not running the ball. I feel like as much as they should be with who they have, but decision making has been an issue that's led to turnovers. So yeah, so I gave Auburn a D, Chris a D minus. All right, what would you give? What would you grade the Florida Gators so far?
I'm giving them a C minus. I know that it's been disappointing, but you got to build in the expectation of the schedule. I think on the positive, they got two quarterbacks they like. I think the offense is getting a little bit slept on. They're 12th in SP plus right now on offense, but the Miami game was a disaster. The A&M game, yeah, they just looked awful. A lot of that game, and they're playing a downpour. Now, at other times, they put up big numbers against Sanford and took care of business against Mississippi State on the road. So it's not all bad, but the defense isn't very good. And just in their biggest game, that they weren't good at all. Their biggest two games, I haven't lost all hope for them being a decent team, but it just, again, and maybe C minus is too generous given, Florida's history, but that's where I'll land.
I'm going D plus for Florida. I'm not buying it. I don't see a way for them to get out of this. They're I think it was good they got that Mississippi State win. I think it's good the locker room hadn't given up yet, but I just don't see a clear path for them to have a good rest of the season. And you're right, they haven't played good in the big games this year, and that's a problem for Florida, I think. And it will be tough for them to bounce back out of this. So yeah, I'm going D plus for the Florida Gators. All right, the Georgia Bulldogs. I will go just an A for the Georgia Bulldogs.
I'm going B. You can't discount spotting Alabama that many points. They've been just kind of unexciting on offense. So, and maybe that's when your defense is so good. I mean, the Clemson game was a little bit of a snoozer, but they jumped out to a big lead. They were, Kentucky almost beat them. I think there's room for improvement. You got to grade the elite teams hard against themselves, and I don't think Georgia's an A yet.
Yeah, and I went back and forth because yes, you have to take these games into consideration. But when I saw what they did in the second half of Alabama and the way they came back, I feel like that shows us more what Georgia is. And credit Kentucky's defense in that game for making those key stops. But yeah, and my A is probably a little too generous there. But yeah, I'm an A. Chris is a B there on the Georgia Bulldogs. All right, what say you about Kentucky? What grade do you give the Wildcats?
I'm giving them a B. Obviously, great win against Ole Miss. Got as close to beating Georgia as you're going to get without winning it. But, the offense just hasn't been very good. The South Carolina game was a disaster. Putting it all together, I feel like a B is a fair grade for Kentucky.
That's exactly what I have for the Wildcats as well. Yeah, they've had their really good moments. They've had some questionable moments. But still, I think the defense is really good and they can carry them a long way. So, yeah, I'll go B for them as well. All right, the LSU Tigers. This is one, again, I had is trying to figure out this team. I'm going to go B for LSU as well. And that may be generous. I'm still trying to figure out this LSU team. Again, I thought they've looked better the last couple of weeks, I feel like, in some different areas. But it's hard for me to gauge right now, LSU. So I went B.
I'm going B also. I feel like I see some things better. You're without Harold Perkins for the year. I feel like Garrett Nussmeier is doing a very underrated job as they've developed some weapons, but I'm not a believer in that defense just yet. I'm not sure if they're going to have the horses. And come on, they could easily have two losses if not for some breaks that went their way in the South Carolina game.
Right, and I think that factors into it as well. We still have a lot to learn about this LSU team. There is no doubt about it. All right, the Ole Miss Rebels. What would you grade Lane Kiffin and the Rebels?
I'm giving them a B. They smashed the teams they were supposed to smash and looked great doing it. The defense still played well against Kentucky, but you didn't finish the job. You got to beat Kentucky at home. I mean, a C feels unfair given that they're 4-1 and have been dominant in those, but you can't give them an A either because this is the one test that was of the teams really going to test them, and they lost it at home.
You're right. I went B plus because I still think there's a lot of upside to this team. I still think they're very good. They can win a lot of games this year, and I think they will win some big games. But yeah, they're at home against Kentucky, and they can't finish. I mean, that's good. An elite team would be able to win and finish that game, and they couldn't. And so, yeah, I'm going B plus because I still think that there is a lot of green grass ahead of this team. But yeah, it makes you think: can Lane Kiffin win these big games? Can this team win playoff games? Like there's a lot of questions after that Kentucky game.
Yeah, there certainly are.
All right, the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I'm gonna go. I hate to be harsh. I'm gonna go F right now. I'm just zero impressed. They've been very uninspired. It's just it does not look good right now in Starkville.
I'm going to give them a C minus. I'll be a little more generous. And this is, again, grading against yourself a little bit. I mean, they're ranked our 16th team and have been for about a month now. But you looked at them on paper, Chase, the talent just didn't seem to be there outside maybe some of the skill positions on offense. They've lost Blake Shapen through no fault of their own. Jeff Levy tried to put a stamp on this team in terms of identity, but they lost a bunch of guys. It's the NIL era. Yeah, I mean, the Arizona State game was a harbinger of what was ahead when they just got boat raced from the jump. But let's be fair. It's a tough job too, in a tough spot. So I feel like I'll have a little more grace for them for the situation. But and by the way, played Texas close for a half before kind of gravity took over. So there's that.
Yeah, you're much nicer to Mississippi State than I was. All right, the Missouri Tigers. Chris, what's your grade for the Tigers?
I'll give them an A minus. Probably let Boston College hang around a little bit longer than they should have. Definitely let Vanderbilt hang around longer than it should have. And if Brock Taylor can hit a field goal, where it might have a very different conversation. But hey, also pitched shutouts in the first two games, are unbeaten. So A minus feels fair.
Yeah, that's exactly what I gave them, and for a lot of the same reasons. Still learning, still figuring out, is this a playoff type team? And I think they have the potential to be. I think they need to get both running backs more involved. I think Nate Noel's having a good season. Get Luther Burden more involved a little bit. I feel like he hasn't been what we thought he would be all season long. He has been in some games. So I think if Missouri gets clicking on all cylinders, I think they most definitely will be a high level team. But yeah, I agree with you there on the A minus. All right, the Oklahoma Sooners. I'm going to go B. I feel like they're in a tough spot. Injury after injury after injury. Some long-term injuries. They've just been battling it. Yes, they've been winning games, but still, I feel like they've got some things to do offensively to get better. Defensively, I really like them, but I'm going to give them a B just because offensively, they haven't been clicking. They haven't, and Michael Hawkins may be the spark they need, and I think he could be, but I'm going to go B for the Sooners.
I almost felt like giving them an incomplete. With all the injuries, offensive line, receiver, the quarterback. I'm going to give them a C and just split it down the middle. I mean, defense has been great. The injuries have hurt them. Jackson Arnold didn't develop as they hoped. They've already switched quarterbacks. They haven't found a running game out of what we thought was a pretty talented room. Again, you can give the reasons for that, but they're kind of right there where you can't give them a failing grade. Because they've won 4 games already, although they're not, the skins they've won so far aren't huge, but I just feel like it is what it is at this point.
Right. Yeah. And it it's hard to gauge at this point, what the rest of the season can look like with injuries and everything. All right, the South Carolina Gamecocks. Chris, what is your grade for Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks?
I'm going to give them a B plus. If they get that LSU game one way or the other, and I would argue you don't throw a flag in a spot here or there that was questionable, and they're probably getting an A, but they didn't. They also struggle with Old Dominion. They also waxed Kentucky. I feel like B plus is fair for the situation.
I went B. The LSU game that hurt. We could be looking at a 4-0 team, and the Old Dominion game didn't look pretty, but they won it. They looked good against Kentucky. And so I feel like if they're healthy, they're going to be able to win some games. This week will be tough. They got Ole Miss. It is in Columbia, South Carolina, which I think will be big. They haven't played in South Carolina in a long time, as I saw earlier. So maybe this could be a game Shane Beamer can get his guys fired up for and compete in. It'll be tough. But I feel like they're sitting there to be. And again, you get Rocket Sanders more involved. You get Lenore Sellers healthy, and I think this could be an interesting year for South Carolina.
Yeah, I think it will be. The health is going to be the key. All
right, the Tennessee Volunteers. I'm going to give the Vols an A for a number of reasons.
I'm going to give them an A plus. Now, look,
okay,
maybe the Vols got the answer to the test ahead of time. When you're playing Chattanooga and you're playing Kent State, so that's part of it. It's easy to rack up big numbers when that's who you're playing. But, the biggest test was at Oklahoma, and we talked about how Oklahoma's defense, Tennessee just kind of cruised through that game. NC State, not as tough as we thought it was going to be. Tennessee, once it got going, second quarter on, halftime, whenever it was, cruised in that game. All you can do is answer the questions on the test in front of you, and the Vols have, look, we know what the offense is, and we just did a whole video talking about how elite their defense has been. So there we go.
Yeah, I would go A for Tennessee. I'm not giving anybody an A plus at this point. I feel like I would do that later on. I still have a lot to see from Tennessee, and I think that matchup with Alabama will show us a lot about what this Tennessee team is, and I think even this week against Arkansas, seeing a couple really good rushers in Quentin Jackson and Taylor Green will be interesting. But I'll go A for Tennessee. All right, the Texas Longhorns. I'm also giving Texas an A. They have looked very good offensively. They've looked good defensively. It's a really good team that Steve Sarkisian has. And even with their starting quarterback, Quinn Ewers, out, Arch Manning has come in and done the job.
Yeah, I feel like I could say almost exactly the same thing I did about Tennessee. That maybe you had the answers to the tests, but you didn't forget what the answers were.
Right.
And you went to the big house and beat Michigan. I know it's not the Michigan team that we saw last year. It is a big win. That's a tough place to win. So, look, this team's been ranked number 1 until Alabama beat Georgia. So, that's got to be an A plus.
Yeah. That's the Texas Longhorns. All right, Texas A&M. What would you grade the Aggies at this point?
I'll go B minus. You're one play away from beating Notre Dame and being a little better, but it's been kind of an uninspiring B minus. Your defense is good. Your offense is just kind of there. Marcel Reed makes some plays. You're unspectacular, but you're not bad. You're a B minus.
Yeah, I go B for Texas A&M. I think leaving that one on the field against Notre Dame, dropping that one on your home field really hurts. And it has been kind of uninspired at times. I mean, a 6-point win over Bowling Green. You beat Florida by 13. You beat Arkansas 21-17. So it's been kind of lackluster. So I'll go B for A&M. And the Vanderbilt Commodores, I'm going to go B for Vandy. I mean, it's been a much better start to the year than I think I would have imagined for Vanderbilt. And last time we saw them on the field, they took Missouri to overtime. I mean, I think that says a lot about where this Vanderbilt program is right now.
Yeah, and they also lost to Georgia State, which they never should have lost. You
Yeah.
get that one, you make one more play, you got an A, but they didn't. I mean, hey, quality win over Virginia Tech, and you darn near put a big dent in Missouri's playoff hopes if you can hit a field goal.
Yeah. So that is our grades for all 16 of the SEC football teams. We will roll into some likely or unlikely now, Chris. And I've got a scenario I want to throw out here first for you. All right. Likely or unlikely, Kentucky gets 8 wins.
Ooh, I know the schedule, I think, but I want to pull it up. Does that include the bowl game or is that regular season?
Regular season.
Okay. You're sitting on 3. You need to get 6 more out of Vanderbilt, Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, Murray State, Texas, Louisville. Sorry, 5 more, right?
Yes.
They get Murray State. I'm going to say they get Vanderbilt, Florida, and Auburn. And then give them Louisville because I'll always win that one. I'll buy it, but I'm not feeling great about it. And that's no reflection on Kentucky. It's more about the schedule. But boy, that defense is good.
They are good. And look, I think the way the defense is playing, I think they can do that. I think they can get there. I think they may beat a team that maybe we don't think they can or that they won't be favored in. Like I think that's what because they've shown it. They've shown against Ole Miss. They've shown they can play with Georgia. Like they've shown they can play with really good teams and really high-powered offenses. And so, yeah, I like this Kentucky defense, and I think this defense is going to keep them in some games. I think they could. We'll see. Should be interesting to see what Kentucky does from here on out.
All right, I'm going to give you one. Alabama goes unbeaten in the regular season.
Unbeaten in the regular season. You know, this is tough because, look, I think they can. I think this is a team that can. But will they is the question for me. I don't know if anyone can. I don't know if anyone can go unbeaten on the season. But if there was a team to do it, I think it could be Alabama, could be Texas. That and look, you know, sometime and there's going to be a lot of football. There's more football to be played this year because you got, you know, a 12-team playoff, so you're going to be playing more games. It's going to be so hard to go undefeated. And, you know, sometimes a loss is good in there to get you thinking right. Man, that's tough. You know what? I'm going to say likely. I think they certainly can.
I think you're thinking through it the way that I was. The easy one would have been a one loss because you said, all right, they lose at Tennessee, but they beat everybody else, or maybe they win that one and you know pick one up unexpectedly somewhere else because that happens. But I think I wanted to hear how you thought through it, and that's why I asked it.
Yeah, if they were to lose one, I think it would either be Tennessee or LSU. And you may be saying LSU, well, they go to Baton Rouge. That's a tough place to play. Alabama always hasn't had the best of luck there at LSU. So I think it could be one of those two if they were to lose one. But I think this certainly is a team that could go unbeaten. I have an Alabama scenario for you here, Chris, and that is Jalen Milroe wins the Heisman Trophy, likely or unlikely.
Buddy, you stole my question. But the good news is I've been thinking through that already. I'll answer it this way. I would take the field to Jalen Milroe. But if you made me stick on one player, I think I would take Jalen Milroe. Now, here's the question. What do you do with Travis Hunter?
Right.
Because I think if you're just saying who's the best football player in the country, I mean, a guy who stars on both sides of the ball, and doesn't, I mean, that may be your guy. And you see weird things happen. I don't have to tell you about Charles Woodson versus Peyton Manning. So does the hype machine get behind him? You got that extra attention with Deion Sanders as your coach. I mean, the problem is you've got a big wild card here. And what do voters do with Travis Hunter? Look, if Colorado's playing for something that's significant, it's like a Big 12 title, he might be your guy.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of variables in that one, man. And I think the biggest one is sitting over in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah. I think, though, because I agree with what you're saying about Travis Hunter. But I think if they are not competitive, which they have been, but if they're not competitive all season long, I don't see how he can get it, even though he is a really good player. And, I think a lot of people are turned off to what's going on, at Colorado anyway. So, but when you look at a complete player, especially the quarterback position, Jalen Milroe can do it all. And I think he showed that in that first half against Georgia. I mean, that was a Heisman game, if especially the first half for Milroe. He really showed the country what he can do, and it was fascinating to watch.
Yeah, he is so much. I mean, both of them are so much fun to watch. But yeah, I think you bring up some good points there. And I'm thinking situations where a guy won the Heisman without his team being elite. The probably the biggest one in our lifetime is Tim Tebow. I think won it on an 8-4 Florida team, and I don't remember who else was in the running that year. And if you want to go way back, I think Paul Hornung won the Heisman one year with Notre Dame having a losing record, but that's also Notre Dame. That was a much different time and place, and the situations where that happens are very few and far between.
Yeah, so that'll be fascinating to watch. So that is some likely or unlikely here on our 17th episode of the SEC Football Hour. That'll do it for this episode. We have great content all over the channel, game predictions, and previews and reaction on Saturday night. We've got football, basketball, baseball content rolling out. So subscribe to our channel there at Southeastern 16. And we'll be back next week with more of the SEC Football Hour. And this is Southeastern 16, and we're brought to you by Bet Online.